Hello and welcome to episode 393 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert, as always, Damien Fay and me, Andy Leakes. Damien, welcome back. What a week, eh?
What a week has been busy. I mean, we've got the autumn statement in there, which always makes it a bit mental. I mean, I've done a couple of pieces for the press this week. The Mail on Sunday and the Observer / Guardian. I did some pieces. One of those centred around the autumn statement, actually. So if you get those papers, you'll probably see me in there today. But it's been really hectic in a positive way, because it means we're getting out there and doing things, and the Money to the Masses names getting out there. But far more importantly than any of that, I just want to talk about the podcast meetup again. So don't forget, Thursday the 8th of December, we are going to be going to central London near Leadenhall Market. So the exact pub will decide, but Leadenhall Market, if you go there, is covered over with numerous pubs within it. So keep an eye on moneytothemasses.com/events and our socials, and we'll decide which pub it will be. But on the 8th of December at 6:30, you can get there a bit before. We'll probably be there before 6:30, but get there, meet me, Andy, and the team. I can confirm the team are coming. So I know at least Lauren and Harvey will be there. So please make sure you come along and say hello. If you've ever found anything useful that we do, and I know that many of you enjoy the stuff that the team does as well to contribute towards the show, it would be great to see some of our female followers as well. So don't think it's just a bunch of blokes meeting up in a pub, because it's certainly not. And don't just think that other people will come. We do want to meet everybody. So if you're going to come, let us know so we can look out for you. But please make sure you do come, because it'd be wonderful for the team to see people out there who listen and read the content that we do. Because you have to remember, we put this out, and I think Andy worked it out one day. I think we get more people going every week to listen to Money to Masses than actually fill Watford's football stadium. But we never get that perception, because obviously we record this in a studio in the offices. So I'd really like the team to get some feedback, because it's really motivating.
And it'll be really lovely to see people of all ages, and like you say, female listeners too. Damien, why don't we give an unfair prize? Why don't we give out a mug? It's completely unfair, because people can't really control it, to the youngest listener that turns up, and also the oldest. And that way we can try and encourage our listeners from both sides of the spectrum.
And the person who's travelled the furthest, and yes, the person who's travelled the least distance as well. So there you go, because everybody a reason to try and make it to the podcast meetup. So please do make our day. Put that date in your diary. We'll give you more details as we go along, but we'll be there having a few drinks.
Okay, so let's move on with the podcast then. What have we got coming up on today's show?
This week's podcast is going to be slightly different. They're going to be 2 pieces this week rather than the usual 3, because they're going to be 2 chunky pieces. So one of the pieces you're going to do later on, Andy, is about the autumn statement and covering what was announced and how it will impact you. But the piece I'm going to be doing to start with is all about money habits and how to make good money habits and how to stop your bad money habits. But it really is how you start to become better with money.
Okay, so let's get on with that first chunky piece then, money habits.
Yeah, so this is going to be a piece that I think people will refer back to, because it covers how to be better with money and things that I've learned myself. Now, last week's podcast, I talked about why we should talk about money. And one of the things is because you keep learning. And this piece is inspired by a book that I read in the last couple of weeks. So it's one called Atomic Habits by James Clear. And it's all about how to build and break habits. So how to build good ones and how to break bad habits. And it's aimed at every part of your life. So how to be able to achieve things that you would like to achieve in your future. And the premise of the book is you can achieve some amazing things by making small changes to your life. And it's by sometimes reading and learning, taking other ideas, that you can then assimilate that and reflect upon it, and then can inspire you to take that and put your own spin and learnings on top of that for the benefit of other people. Now, one of the most popular podcasts that we've done in recent history was podcast 355, and it was called The Difference Between the Poor and the Rich. And that podcast was inspired by the Rich Dad, Poor Dad book. And it was my take on that after reading that book and my views on it, and then giving people some further insight into the real world. And it was really well received. So I'm going to do something similar today with the idea of habits. Now, to be clear, people would consider me good with money. I mean, I run a money show. We have the Money to the Masses website. There's 80/20 Investor. There's the MOT. But when I was younger, I wasn't very good with money. And that's like most people. Everything's a journey.
And that's actually funny you should say that, because a good example of that is this week, obviously, I was doing the commentary on the autumn statement and I've written the article, we're doing the podcast. I shared some of that with some of my friends in a WhatsApp group because they wanted me to help distill it down and help them out. And they made the comment that they find it really funny that the guy they knew back then is now the guy that's giving them money tips and advice. I used to have this nickname called Acumen Andy, and it was an ironic nickname because I was the guy who had no acumen at all when it came to money. So yeah, exactly that. We move on and we learn from it.
And we change. And a lot of that is down to habits. Now, going back to a recent meetup, when I did an event recently, a live event I talked about, and somebody came up to me and mentioned, they said, like, I'm surprised at how young you are, given your depth of knowledge, and how did you accrue all this knowledge and be so good at what you do? I mean, apart from the fact that I actually look younger than I am, I'm told that regularly. I'm in my mid-40s, so that was sort of part of the reason. I've been doing this for like way over 20 years. But it was a very good question. And a lot of it is down to habits that I've clearly formed over time that I didn't necessarily realise. So what suddenly made me go from being not particularly great with money to being good with money. So the first thing I want to do is just highlight some of the principles that are in that book that I mentioned, and go and read it, go and download it on Audible if you want to. I have to say Audible is one of my favourite formats for consuming books that are about business. I can listen to them at twice speed because a lot of the principles are reiterated a lot, so you can get through it very quickly. So if you listen to a podcast, I do suggest you probably like Audible as a means to consume books. So James Clear came up with 4 simple principles to create good habits, and they were that you make it obvious, you make it attractive, you make it easy, and you make it satisfying. Now, just to run through a bit more detail on each of those, then to make it obvious, it was really about designing your environment to make the cues of good habits obvious and visible. Now, to give you a well-known example, the case of where if you put a bowl of fruit in an office rather than a bowl or packets of biscuits, then people will start to eat more fruit. It's not because they suddenly become more healthy, it's because the choices are there and they're easier. So it's one of the tips you also see on these healthy eating programs, to put fruit more visible around your home rather than putting it in cupboards. So the second rule, or the second law that he states, is to make it attractive, which is you pair an action you want to do with an action that you need to do. And it could be you also do something you enjoy immediately before a difficult habit, or you might join a group of people or something, a culture that promote a positive habit. So let's say you wanted to read more books, then you might join a book club, and therefore the positive reinforcement of that group around reading and enjoyment you get will help make that habit a bit more attractive. You make it easy, which kind of goes back to the example I said about the fruit, but you reduce any friction that stops you doing a good habit. So you prepare your environment to make future actions easier. It could be, for example, that you want to go for a run more frequently, so therefore you put your gym gear beside your bed at night, so when you go up in the morning it's the first thing that you put on, for example, to encourage you to go out for a run. There are also things where you might do something that you might do it in small chunks, so you actually only do a 2-minute version of everything. It's quite an interesting concept, actually. The author's idea was if you want to get fit, that you might go to the gym and only work out at the gym for 2 minutes and then you go. And if you do that and keep repeating, the habit is actually going to the gym, not the exercise, because you want to go to the gym more frequently. Then what will happen is you have a new habit of regularly going to the gym, and those 2-minute exercise intervals will actually end up becoming longer and longer because you'll think, while I'm here, I'm going to exercise for longer. So you end up formulating a very positive habit, which is just getting you to go to the gym. The final law is that you make it satisfying when you do things, that you give yourself an immediate reward when you complete a habit, because immediate rewards always are more attractive than long-term ones, which is just human nature. That's the way we're programmed. And you can do things like try and track how your habit's going, and also try and do streaks. So we are all addicted to doing things in streaks. It's why games and things are designed for you to keep trying to make you get rewards if you do something every day. So it could be people who go on these gambling sites where they get a reward or a bonus each day if they go on there. They know the power of habit by making you go on and log on to get those rewards. So that is the framework of how you can make good habits, and you can start to apply that to any area of your life. Conversely, if you want to break a bad habit, you do the opposite. So you would remove the cues in your environment. So if you don't want to eat sweets, you take them away. If you want to make something unattractive, so what you're doing is you'll highlight the benefits of avoiding a bad habit. And I'm going to give you some examples in a minute that relate to me. You make it more difficult to do, so you increase the friction and you increase the number of steps between you and bad habits, and you make it unsatisfying. And that could be that you end up having some form of accountability with somebody else who's commit to doing something, and therefore it's unattractive to go against that. So if you say you're going to do something, we want to, as creatures, pin our colours to the mast, and we want to be consistent. And that is called the power of consistency, which I've talked about previously on the podcast, which is a sales tactic that can be used on you in reverse. So go read the book if you want to find out more. There's a lot more detail than I've just whizzed through there. But I wanted to just quickly mention a few other points that came out of the book, and then how I worked out that I do a lot of this stuff inadvertently over years and have become a bit better at money. And you will recognize some of these things in your positive habits and some of the things in your bad habits as well. So one of the things that came out is you should focus on your systems rather than the goals. What that means is that if you want to achieve something, then the system that you put in place to help you is the progress, whereas the goal is just the direction of travel. And people can have the same goal, but some people achieve it and some people don't. If you want to be an Olympic gold medalist, then some people achieve that, but many people don't. It isn't the goal that defines whether you actually achieve something. We just think it is because the only people we ever see who actually achieve these things, it's that survivorship bias that I talked about on a previous podcast. You only see the people who put in place systems and habits that allow them to achieve that. So it could be an athlete, taking that example of a gold medal, their habits of getting up and working out and training every day repeatedly over many, many years. They therefore have a habit which enables them to get better incrementally over time by 1% a day, whatever it might be. Those small compounding effects therefore give huge outsized results. And if you want to be rich, for example, you need to invest regularly. It could be in passive funds, it could be automatically done. So all of these things are taking some of those rules and applying them to achieve something in the long run. And of course, one thing to bear in mind is that even when you achieve a goal, then having some sort of process in place ensures that you can continue to achieve it, or you just don't give up. So that could be whether you're trying to save money or invest or buy something. By having positive habits in place with a system that helps them, then you're more likely to continue to achieve it. And the other thing I think is important to point out before I then tell you how this has happened to me over the last 2 decades is one of them is you need to set a new belief identity. And having read that part in the book, I do think it's quite important. I don't agree with necessarily everything that I read in the book. You don't have to agree with everything in it, but setting a new belief identity, if you go back to the beginning of this podcast, you'll notice that I said I wasn't very good with money, but now I am. But that is what a belief system is. I've been told that I'm good with money, I'm considered an expert in money, and therefore that is something that becomes part of your identity. Whereas before, I would have been thinking that I spent a lot of money, I was frivolous, I wasn't particularly good with money. That then becomes part of your identity as well. So your habits have to align with the sort of person that you want to become. So you have to have a habit that will be positive, that enables you to become someone who might be a saver rather than a spender. So let me just go through some of the things that I've realized that I now do that I thought probably lots of people did, but they clearly don't. And it's become habit. So the first thing is, I want to answer that question of how I became good with things like investing. Given that I did work in the city and my job was to build investment portfolios, but lots of people's job is to do that. And why did I become so focused and could do shows talking about where markets were going? And the answer I've realised now is because of a habit that I formed where I would go and read the FT every day for 2 minutes. I wouldn't read the whole thing. I would go and find the market section of the FT, and you'll see all these charts with data and share prices, but there is always a summary, or there always used to be a summary in there of what's going on in markets during that day. That would take me no more than 2 minutes to read. But now you obviously can get it online and it's updated throughout the day. So what I did is I actually, now looking back, had a habit which was made easy because I could do it in under 2 minutes. So going back to that making it easy rule, it was attractive in a way because I worked in an environment which was money. It was what my job was. So therefore, understanding more about this was a positive. And if you do that every day for basically 2 decades, or even that long, for a year or two, you will suddenly understand lots about money because you're reading about why markets are behaving in the way they do, and you start to absorb that. That became a habit I still have to this day. And I didn't realise it's a habit, but now looking at it, it is a habit that I do every day. When I went on holiday during August, I still did it every day, even though I was on holiday. And it's a habit that I can't stop, but it's a positive. Now, another habit that I have is that I check the investment markets, open my stock market app on my phone, which I've set up in a particular way to show some key indices and some key stocks as well. So I can look at that and get an overview very quickly of what's happening in markets. And part of that has come from me understanding what's going on with markets. And part of that is also because of the habit I had about reading about them. So I could see, oh, that is why those things have moved up and down as I read about the previous day or during that day. And I did a podcast episode on it. In fact, if you go back to podcast 184, which is in July 2018, it's getting the most from your phone's stock app. And in there, I tell you how I set mine up. Now, I maybe have changed a few things that are on there or added a few more over time. Maybe I should do an update on that one week and tell you what I'm watching now, but you will find that useful. But by looking at that, again, in 2 minutes, I get an overview of what's happening in markets and then go, well, why is that happening? And it leads me on to then go and look at it if I don't quite understand why, or look at the news if I need to. I also follow select people on social media and select news outlets just to get opinions and people who share and collate certain types of maybe charts, investment articles. So it saves me time and I look at those. Is there anything interesting? Maybe not. But one of the things that I do is that I do that every morning, and you're going to hear a lot about my cup of coffee. So I wake up in the morning. The first thing I do is I, like everybody else, pick up my phone. I'll have a cup of coffee and basically I'll hide in bed for about 5-10 minutes while I'm drinking my cup of coffee, hoping my children don't come in and disturb me until I actually engage with the rest of the world. In that time, which to me is the time that I know as a parent it sounds awful, but you can all relate, that bit of peace for that moment, that to me is a positive of my day until I get up and then get on with work and everything else, that I've ended up associating those things of checking to do with maybe markets or whatever it is with that period of time. So when I get there, it's my default action. And now I've realised, having looked about how habits form, that that is a habit I've got.
It's interesting that you mention that because we've talked about our morning coffee routines prior to the podcast, but I always pictured you downstairs on the sofa, but I never quite pictured you in bed doing this. I don't know. For me, it just conjures up a slightly different image.
A powerful one.
A very powerful one.
But everyone's different. That's one of the other things about who you are and your habits. They're very idiosyncratic because the things that you like and the things that you don't, they are going to be different for everybody. So that won't work for certain people. But it's the power of consistency. And one of the things that is a real big takeaway from all of this is that it's amazing what you can do over time if you just improve at 1% at a time. So if you keep increasing your performance by 1% every day, then you've made huge compounds. This is the same as we talk about in investing, but you can do it on your own with self-improvement. So you just keep pushing, you just keep moving. And now, moving on from that, my morning coffee comes up again because another thing I do is I'm a massive fan of budgeting apps. Now, there's one in particular that I use more than any other, and I've synced up my bank accounts and credit cards, and I open that and I press the sync button and it syncs through because in the morning, all your transactions have gone through overnight, and then I look to make sure they're allocated to the right budgets. If there's anything odd in there, I don't know what it is. So therefore, by default, that means that I'm unlikely to go for an extended period of time with some dodgy transaction going through, someone steals my identity, which obviously that's happened to everybody at some point where they've had transactions go through fraudulently, but I can then deal with it. So I don't engage my brain with any of that stuff. What I do is I open it up, click run, look at it, right, fine, everything's normal, check the certain transactions, how it is on the budgets, and that's me done. I don't think about money that often during the day. I really don't. So people might think that I'm obsessed with it, but I don't, because I've kind of get into a habit that I'm just spinning the plate rather than having to try and balancing it every day. And the reason this works, that I've come to understand, is because there are a couple of other quirks, things that I do. So the first rule of this theory of how you make good habits is you make it obvious. Now, if you see my phone, I don't have any apps on it. So I've over time have deleted all the apps off my phone, bar the ones that I want, like the budgeting app, like the one that might relate to email or something like that. My home screen doesn't have any apps on it. And the reason was because I found I was just tapping constantly on my phone, like everybody else, and ignoring my kids, and just realizing I need to be a little bit more present. And it was a technique that I tried a couple of years ago, and I removed all of the apps from my phone. It used to be very difficult to do, but now Apple actually allows you to do it more easy. You can just decide not to have an app appear on your home screen, but it's still there. You just have to search for it. So I would suggest anybody do that. It makes you use your phone less. But by hiding all those apps away, when I look at my phone, I don't see anything like social media that I can immediately tap on. I have to go and search for the app to go and open it to then start using it. But not only that, I've actually put a timer lock on those apps during weekdays. So I have to put in a PIN code to let them open. And that goes to that idea of making a bad habit difficult, because I put so many steps in there. As I'm doing it, I then sort of think, oh no, I'm not going to do that. But the budgeting apps and things like that I use relating to money are the ones that are there. And the other one, which is my Achilles heel, is Pokemon. I know I've mentioned it a few times. I've let the cat out of the bag that I'm a bit sad, and I play it quite a bit. But what happens is that when I pick my phone up, my default action is to do something that's positive rather than negative. And in this case, it's to do with money. So I make it obvious, I make it attractive because I'm in bed. The other thing is, after I've done those things, I then go and do some of the other things that I quite like to do, like I said, which is play a game or something like that while I'm sitting there having my cup of coffee. But it's done in that stack. They call it a habit stack, that the coffee leads to me to do checking the budgeting apps, maybe some investment stuff. And then immediately I'm going on to very quickly to go and sit there and play something like Pokemon. So therefore I'm getting a reward by doing it. And that's why it's probably stuck with me for so long. And the other thing is, you have to make it easy. If you remember, it's automated. So checking a budgeting app is very easy. I don't have to go look through statements. I don't have to cross-reference data or anything like that. I just open it. The one thing I don't have in there is I don't have investment accounts linked. So I can't see any investments that I hold, because I don't like the idea of checking them too regularly, because I think that gets you into bad habits, which makes you an emotional investor. So while I check what markets are doing, i.e. what the FTSE 100 is doing and what other indices are doing, bond markets and stuff like that, I don't look at my own portfolio to see what that's doing, because that will get me in a bad habit. So I don't ever log in to the platform that I have to see what's going on, because I automate my investments by dripping in each month. So I don't go and check how it's doing. I couldn't even tell you exactly what the value is. I'd have a ballpark guess, obviously, but I tend to check them at most once a month. And what's good is you can do manual updates into some of those budgeting apps. You don't have to link accounts. But the other thing is that I do it every day, and if I don't do it, then I never let it go for more than, say, a day where I won't check. And this is that idea of building streaks. So it goes to that fourth law of making it satisfying, and it's that achieving streaks. And I don't want to keep talking about Pokemon, because again, it makes me seem very sad, but those sorts of games and games you like to play on your phone know about streaks. Like I mentioned earlier, they reward you by going in each day, and that's satisfying. And it's a bit like that when you're doing the budgeting stuff. You can see you're still on track, you still can keep a roof over your head, and you don't have to worry about money for another day. That sort of thing is very rewarding. And so by doing that, I've inadvertently created this way of maintaining my money, which is very automated. I had thought about doing a whole podcast about how I automate my money, but interestingly, this is kind of letting some of the cat out of the bag. Now, one of the things I want to talk about as well is budgeting. So I was a spendthrift before, but now I obviously save and invest. If you see me, I don't value things like clothes and labels and all that kind of stuff. I would have done when I was younger. I did, but I don't now.
And you'll see that yourself when you come to the podcast meetup.
I was thinking you might say that, Andy, but you probably will. No, luckily my wife makes sure I don't look a complete mess, because obviously I've got to still do videos for Money to the Masses. We want people to watch them. But one of the things that with budgeting is, again, it's changing that mindset, making it more attractive. So rather than being a budget, it's a spending plan. So each month, and in particular with the cost of living crisis, just like everybody else, money is becoming tighter. So what I do in my household, my wife and I sit down and we go, what have we got planned this month? And we therefore assign any discretionary money we were going to have left over from our bills to what we're going to be doing with it. It may be that one of us has got a meal out with friends, or we've got other plans, or we're going to buy this. And what we do is we therefore enable us to do the things that we need to do and would potentially like to do, and make decisions around that. There may be things that we won't be able to afford to do, and therefore we'll make a decision that that's going to have to be given up. But that's fine, because then it enables you to do things that you want, and you're in control of that. But the other thing with it is that I've also embraced the idea of using some of the app-only banks where they allow you to have pots and things like that. So they allow you to have a current account. It's not my main current account. I don't use them for my main bank, but that's just partly because of legacy. But I will move money over there that would be for our discretionary spend, and then we can put it into pots that have already got assigned to them. So we can make sure we've got that money that we've got to do something with the children that we'd agreed to do, or we've got that money for somebody to go out for dinner, or maybe it's just to buy something that we really need for the household. But by making sure that we've got the money and we don't just use credit cards, it takes the stress out of spending. You know it's allocated for. But there's another thing that's occurred from doing it. So let's say I was going to go out with my friends, for example, and we'd allocated some money that, I could go down the pub with Andy to have a couple of drinks or go out for dinner. The thing is, if I don't spend all that money that had been allocated for that meal out, what I do, because it was allocated for that evening, it therefore goes into the pot that means I could go out another night because it was already allocated to have been spent. And what I've found has happened is that I am much more, not frugal, but I place value on things a little bit more in that regard. And so what I'm doing is actually finding out I'm going out a bit more, but I'm spending a bit less on each occasion. So I'd rather go out with Andy 2 nights rather than go out for just one, because going out for 2 nights is more fun than going out for one. It doesn't mean that I have to drink loads of alcohol in one particular outing. We could just spread it over a couple of nights. And that is what the value element is. And when I've found I've got into a good habit that therefore sometimes I don't even then use that money on a subsequent night or whatever. But what is interesting, it goes back to that instant gratification, because by not spending money, the instant gratification is that not I'm getting better with money in the long run or going to be wealthier, it's that I get another night out. And for me personally, going out with a friend or family member or something like that, or doing something with the children, is actually positive, and that's a positive gratification. I end up finding that at the end of the month I might have some of those bits left over and be able to sweep them over into a savings account. But if not, then that's fine. And to give you another example, there are people who have used a positive power of habit. If they wanted to save money, they didn't want to go out maybe eating at restaurants anymore because of spending too much. Every time they cooked a meal for themselves indoors as a couple, they would put the money they saved into a savings account for a holiday, or it could be a portion of that money. So therefore, they're not still spending the same amount, they're putting a portion aside for something else that's much more gratifying in the near term rather than for something that's their future retirement. Because as humans, always the instant gratification will generally overcome that long-term reward. And that's why partly for me, I couldn't be somebody who does the FIRE movement, where I deny myself everything now to try and achieve something in the future. And it's one of the reasons I've never been a fan of it. Some people really like it. You have to be the kind of person that's really focused, but it goes against what making good habits is, because as humans, you've got to make a habit positive and it's got to be attractive. Eventually, you may be the person that finds that kind of frugality as a positive feedback. It's down to the individual, but the issue is, for a lot of people, and I'd argue most people, it would be almost impossible for them to make a positive habit of doing that because it goes against the kind of person that they are and the person they want to be. So you have to remember it's very idiosyncratic. The other thing I just want to throw in there that I've been doing over the years and it's helped is I have 0 spend days. So we'll do a period where you just don't spend any money. It isn't always said as a household, we're going to spend no money today. But the idea being that if we don't spend any money for a day, that's a positive. If I can get through a weekend where I haven't had to spend money, that to me is really positive in this environment, because we've got more money there for if we need it later in the month. But what it also does is, now with hindsight, I've realised that 0 spend days actually work because they break the habit of spending. Because if you break a habit where you spend money every day, then it means that habit stops forming and you end up getting a more positive habit, which is start to save. So that's why that works. And the other thing I just do, and I didn't quite realise, is over time I've stopped carrying a wallet. So I don't have cards on me. I don't carry cash. And of course I have phones and that can help me pay. But one of the benefits of doing that is it does mean you stop spending money, because I'm the kind of person, if I have money in my pocket, it will burn a hole and I'll end up spending it. So it's actually a positive habit by not having it. It reinforces the person that I'd want to be, which is a bit more responsible with money.
That's a good point. And a habit that I changed a while back when I was trying to save money is switch from buying sandwiches every day from down at Tesco, because it wasn't just the £3 I was saving from buying a sandwich. It was the fact I was drawing £10 out, let's say, and then I'd buy my sandwich and I'd have change, and then that change would just dwindle. It would be spent on, I don't know, paper or sweets or whatever. And so by changing that habit, it actually had a positive impact on more than just not buying the lunch.
And to add to that, I know Andy won't say it, but Andy enjoys cooking and makes a good meal. And of course, Andy will therefore spend some of that money on actually making something that he enjoys, which again is a positive habit that reinforces something at home that's really good. The other thing I just want to throw out there, some odd idiosyncrasies I hadn't quite realised. I don't have a cashback credit card. It's one of those things that seems to be trotted out as do this, it's great, you're an idiot if you don't do it. The reason I don't do it is I know it's a positive thing, but I know who I am and the person that I am. But the cashback credit card encourages you by the power of habit. It uses it against you, in fact, because what it does, it says to you, you get an instant reward. Okay, you might not get the cash back that day, later in the year, but you get a reward for spending. And so if you think you're getting a reward by spending money, it's the only way the cash back works. If the card's in your pocket and you don't use it, you don't get cash back. So it encourages you to form a habit, which is to keep spending on that card. So you need incredible amounts of self-control to not overspend on that card. And if you've got that, that is fine. But for most people, things like that can be difficult because you're being encouraged to form a habit, a bad habit, which is to keep using the card for an immediate gratification. And because we're human, that will tend to win. I mean, the other thing that I do is if I'm putting money aside each month, particularly if we're talking about the cost of living crisis, I'm trying to, for when mortgages go up, then if I don't manage it, the full amount that I want to do that month, I therefore really try and do it the second month. I won't fail 2 months in a row because that means that I'm going to continue to fail. Actually, with hindsight, what it is, I've inadvertently worked out, not through conscious thought, that by doing that, I'm forming a bad habit over time, and habits form very quickly. Bad habits do. So what I want people to do, you don't have to take up the things that I do and I've noticed that I do, and there'll be other things that I might do that are good and bad. Don't feel like you've got to do everything perfectly. We're all individuals. The rewards that motivate you, all that sort of stuff is very personal to you. But think about the things that you do well with money and think about the habits that you form that help you to do that. Maybe the things you do bad with money or you'd like to be better at, then think of some habits that you can try and create. Think of the idea of how you could combine them with other things that you enjoy doing and rewards. I would suggest you read the book. It is a very good book. If you listen to it on Audible twice speed, it only takes you about 3 hours to get through it. But I think it's a very powerful idea. And the important thing is no one is born good with money. You just learn it. And if we do things 1% at a time, every day, get better and better incrementally, it's like compounding. It's the exact same thing. You'll become good at something. In fact, you'll become an expert at something. And who knows, you'll end up one day maybe talking on a podcast, telling everybody else about money. Okay, so that's enough of me talking. So Andy, you're going to do a piece now on the autumn statement that was announced on Thursday. Now, of course, with the usual caveats, we could be doing another show in a couple of weeks if recent history is going to be our guide, saying that everything has changed. But hopefully the government's learnt its lesson and we won't be doing it. So Andy, you're going to give us a quick run through of what was announced and how it's likely to impact people.
That's right. So Chancellor Jeremy Hunt came out and he was quite clear in what this statement was all about. It wasn't going to pull any punches. This was about stability and growth. And Rishi Sunak backed that up by saying that this statement was all about putting the economy back onto a positive trajectory and to try and restore our fiscal sustainability. Now, what does that actually mean? What I've done is I've gone through everything that they said, and there was a lot that was announced, not just in terms of changes that were happening, but also future things that were going to happen in terms of investment. But I've distilled it down to the main takeaways so you can work out how this latest budget affects you and your finances. Okay, so let's start with taxation. And the headlines here are that there's going to be no tax increases, but of course that's not strictly true, because what's actually happened is the government have introduced what we like to call as a stealth tax, which is effectively freezing the thresholds on most of the main income tax bands, so that what actually happens in real terms is as wages go up, more people start to pay more tax, they creep into higher tax bands, and people who previously didn't pay any tax, who are now earning more, are suddenly paying tax. So it's a way that the government can effectively increase tax revenue without increasing taxes. So the headline is that the main tax thresholds remain the same, and we've got those all over the site. You probably know them already. But the additional rate of tax, the highest tax band, which is the 45% tax band, has actually been changed, and that's been reduced. So previously you would only pay the top rate of tax, which is 45%, once you earned over and above £150,000. Well, that's been reduced down now to £125,140. So what that means is anyone earning over £150,000 will be paying just over £1,200 a year extra in tax, and anyone now earning over £125,140 will fall into the higher rate of tax, the 45% tax bracket. I'm going to be whittling through a lot of this rather quickly. So just to remind you that all of this is in a nice, easy to read, succinct article with links to all of the changes. And that we put in the show notes as usual. And you can find it as well on the Money to the Masses website. Staying with tax then, let's move on to capital gains tax. The annual exemption amount for capital gains tax is to be cut from 12,300 to 6,000 in April 2023, so from the next tax year, and then reducing to 3,000 the following tax year from April 2024. Stamp duty has reared its head again. Now, this is an ongoing saga, it seems. So back in September, Kwasi Kwarteng announced a change to the thresholds in which stamp duty becomes payable, increasing those thresholds from £125,000 up to £250,000, which effectively meant that anyone buying a house based on these new thresholds for over £250,000 would be saving £2,500 in effect. Well, it's been changed again. So from the end of March 2025, it will revert back to the old thresholds, and we've put a link on the article to details on what those thresholds will be, but effectively it's just reversing what Kwasi Kwarteng did do in the original mini budget back in September. A couple of other quick taxes just to mention: electric vehicles from April 2025, electric vehicles will no longer be exempt from vehicle excise duty, so that's one to keep an eye out for in the next couple of years, especially if you're considering going down that route. And finally, windfall tax, just one to mention there, doesn't really affect us as individuals, but the government has confirmed that the energy profits levy will mean that energy companies that make extraordinary profits must pay an additional 10% in tax. So it was previously 25%. They're now being told that they're going to have to stump up 35%, and that will run until 2028. So let's move on to energy, and the energy price guarantee was what everyone was looking for to see what the changes were going to be, if any. And Jeremy Hunt announced that the energy price guarantee is going to be extended by 12 months. Now, if you remember, the guarantee is that for the average UK household, the government caps the amount that you pay per unit of electricity and gas. And there's some crazy workings and numbers in there, but what it effectively boils down to, the headline is that the average UK household will not pay more than £2,500 per year for their energy. That's going to remain in place for a further 12 months. So it was due to end at the end of March 2023. That's going to go on for another year now, but that cap has been raised slightly, so it's no longer going to cap it at 2,500 for the average UK household. It's now going to be 3,000. Moving on to state benefits, lots of increases across the board here, which is what people have been calling for, and so it's been largely well received. So inflation-linked state benefits are going to be increased by the Consumer Price Index confirmed figures in September of 10.1%. So that's going to be across the board for all inflation-linked state benefits will be increased from April 2023. The benefits cap has also been increased, and that is the total amount that either a family or an individual can claim. So previously a family could claim £20,000 in benefits. That's been increased to £22,000.20. If you're in Greater London, that's slightly more. It's been increased from £23,000 to £25,323. And if you're a single adult, the benefits cap has been increased from £13,400 to £14,753. And again, this is to reflect the massive rise in the cost of living, with inflation hitting that sort of 10-11%. Good news for those on benefits. Another announcement that's really going to help the most vulnerable people is that there'll be a new round of cost of living payments that are going to total up to £1,350 depending on your situation. So those on certain means tested benefits will get £900 next year for the 23-24 tax year. An additional £300 will be available for pensioner households who receive benefits, and another £150 will be available for those on disability benefits. Last couple of things now, let's talk pensions. The government were heavily criticised in 2021 when it went back on its promise to increase state pensions using the triple lock rule. We've got more information on that if you don't know what the triple lock rule is on the Money to the Masses website. It effectively meant instead of going up around 8% last year, they went back, worked the numbers and said, no, we're only doing it by 3.1%. Well, Jeremy Hunt announced that they're not going to be doing that again. They are going back to the triple lock rule, which means that pensions will increase by inflation according to the Consumer Prices Index, which again is that 10.1% figure. What that means is if you reach state pension age before 2016, you'll see an increase of £14.33 a week, about £800 a year. And if you reach state pension age after 2016, then you'll get an extra £18.70 a week, which equates to about £980 a year. Good news for pensioners. And finally, just to wrap this up, national living wage and the national minimum wage has been increased roughly by inflation. The figures are slightly different depending on the rates, depending on how old you are. So just a reminder, the national living wage is the minimum amount per hour that you should earn if you're over 23. There's then a number of different rates for people under the age of 23, which is called the national minimum wage. There's a range of numbers in there, but the highlight is that those over age 23 will see a 9.7% rise to their minimum wage, meaning it's gone from £9.50 per hour minimum to £10.42 an hour. And that means that someone who does full-time hours on the national living wage will see an increase of approximately £1,600 per year. Again, good news. But the thing is, these things are only just barely keeping in line with inflation. So it's good to see they're doing it, but they could, of course, do more. Damien, that's the roundup. Lots in there. But again, people can look at the article to read through the details behind it all.
Yeah, and what's interesting, I was actually asked by one of the papers, particularly how would it impact maybe young people who are in their teens and 20s and who might be renters. And given I had to do that immediately after the budget, I might as well just explain on the podcast, in fact, that they were one of the groups that largely were missed out, because most of the things that benefited them were things that benefited the wider population, whether it be to do with energy, whether it be an increase in benefits or any other changes that help people on low incomes. And of course, people who are on social housing had the cap to their rent increases next year. And the thing is, if you're a private renter, there is no cap. And so those people would have seen not much in the budget for them. And the other thing is the changes to the stamp duty, that reversing of what was announced in the mini budget means that in a few years' time, when people are trying to get on the property ladder, they will end up paying more tax. So that portion of the society will be looking at and thinking, well, that wasn't great. And there's another thing, the bracket creep that you mentioned, which is that stealth tax, which impacts us all. So that was one of the big things within the budget, really. We're all going to end up paying more tax pretty much, because as your wages increase, you then move over thresholds and you start paying higher rates of tax on portions of your income. The issue is, for people who are on lower incomes, they get hit harder by these increases. They feel it more because they're moving often from no taxation into a taxation regime, meaning more of their income is being taxed at higher rates. So they feel that impact because also they don't have sources of untaxed income, which a lot of older people do. Of course, as you mentioned, Andy, the triple lock has benefited the older generation. And there is that thing that the government generally starts to tax earned income more harshly than unearned income. And so, like I mentioned, that a lot of the young people don't have sources of unearned income. So they don't have, say, savings producing income for them. Those allowances, like the savings allowance, weren't touched. And so for people who rely on that, which again might be elderly people, that is good news. So overall, when you look at it, we're all going to end up paying more tax over time, largely because of inflation and wage increases that will try and keep pace with that as much as they can. But there are portions of society that have definitely benefited more under these announcements. But overall, I think the budget was one where they were trying to not do as much as what Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng did, which was promise the moon on a stick, not be able to deliver it without spooking the market. So they went for this kind of stealth taxation route with some other tweaks around the edges. So I dare say there'll be some other fallouts. There normally are after these budgets. There's some detail that comes out, which if there is anything of interest, we'll pick it up in a future episode of the podcast.
Okay, so that's it for this week. And just to mention finally, once again, we are meeting up with you, our podcast listeners. The whole team will be there on Thursday, the 8th of December from 6:30, Leadenhall Market. Make sure you're there. Further details about the exact pub will be released closer to the time. Keep an eye on socials and future Money to the Masses episodes where we'll provide more information.
And don't think I feel stupid if I go along. It'll be a bit odd. You won't feel as stupid as I will dragging the team to central London and people don't turn up to meet them, trying to motivate them and show them what we're doing to help people. So do please make sure that you turn up and we'll have a good evening and you can sit there and meet the team and it will be fun. Trust me, those of you who have been before have always enjoyed it and it is good fun to sort of chat to people who are like-minded, and it's just before Christmas as well.
So that's it. We're done for this week. Until next time.
Until next time.